Mhm.
Well, good morning, fellas, and here we are again,
Morning.
looking at the Gospel of John. Um, by way of review, last week we're in the middle of this story and of Jesus's healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda, and in verses 1 through 9, we see a man who was once in the prone position, but through the healing action of Jesus is now standing with his bedroll, representing his former state under his arm, and he's able to move forward. The Jewish leaders represented within the text as the term the Jews, and I'm real careful with that because what it's really referring to is not the Jews as a people, that's important, but as the religious authority at the time. They see this action taking place, and they process that in their brains. And after the processing of where they take this in their brains, they categorize this action right here as bad. And of course, that puts our heads on tilt. How could anyone, under any condition, look at something as marvelous as this and categorize it as bad? Well, before we get too quick to judge, we should go a little bit deeper here, because this story is actually, in my opinion, pretty close to the religious home that we all live in. So here we are in John 5, 10 through 11. Now let's read together. Someone could read the text as we move on. John 5, 10 through 17.
So the Jews were saying to the man who was cured, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not permissible for you to carry your pallet." But he answered them, "He who made me well was the one who said to me, 'Pick up your pallet and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Pick up your pallet and walk'?" But the man who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had slipped away while there was a crowd in that place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "Behold, you have become well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. For this reason, the Jews were persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But he answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I myself am working."
All right. Thanks, Jeff, for reading that. And that's the text we'll be looking at this morning. So here we are in verse 12 through 15. And there's, in my opinion, a bit of an aside here that we're going to talk about, because we read this idea of healing and sin and forgiveness, and it just puts us in all kinds of there's all kinds of views of this, but I'd like to talk about this, and then we're going to move to verses 16 and 17, which really pertain to the meat of the story. But we have a situation where the religious leaders were really upset because this was happening on the Sabbath. And in their box, the way they formulate their framework of thinking, they saw the healed man walking with his bedroll as a violation of a holy ordinance by God. Notice, holy ordinance. What he was doing was a violation. And so they asked the man, who did this to you? And he says, "I didn't know." They didn't exchange names during the healing procedure. Jesus finds the man later in the temple. We don't know how long, in the temple right here. And he said to him, "Behold, you're well. Your state, sir, has changed. You are no longer lame. You are now active and moving ahead," reminding him of what was and what is. He was in a healed state. Then he jumps right in, Jesus jumps into this whole thing of do not sin anymore, and our heads go tilt so that nothing worse happens to you. You know, and everything in me wants to protect this guy. You know, and all of our theological biases come into when we come to a text like this, trying to explain it away. And so I've been grappling with this, and I'd like to just share some things with you, and let's look at the facts here on the text. Observations regarding healing and sin. We're all over, the 10 of us or 11 of us here on this call probably have different views regarding sin and its connection with sickness and our views of how healing should be administrated. So if it even exists. So the first fact is Jesus does not correlate this man's healing with sin initially. And we can go back to the text, John 5, 6 through 9. But in other occasions, Mark chapter 2, Jesus does connect healing, the initial act of healing, with the forgiveness of sins. In Mark chapter 2, verse 5, Jesus' comments to the paralytic when he's let down through the roof in Mark chapter 2, it's not this occasion, but it's a similar occasion. Jesus says, your sins are forgiven you. So there is data that Jesus does connect sickness and healing with forgiveness of sins. However, in this text, Jesus does come back and talk to the man, a day or so later, whenever they were, in the healing. And the second thing out of Jesus's mouth after stating the fact that the man is healed is stop sinning. Followed by the reasons why he should stop sinning. Okay, so we just take the text for what it is. And this raises all kinds of questions. And so we're going to briefly talk about this. The reality is this, and we are all aware of this, that sinful practice in general leads to suffering and all kinds of undesirable outcomes. We know this. The consumption of legal and illegal drugs to, let's say legal alcohol to an excess causes problems. Many of us have been affected by alcoholism. And that's a sinful practice over time, creates suffering. Illegal drugs, and they're illegal for a reason. The use of tobacco, and I'm not saying if you smoke you're in sin. I'm not making that judgment. However, there are certain things that we can bring into our body, substances that if we do so over time, the end result is there is physical suffering that occurs. Emotional, emotional numbing or emotional state of mind, projection on our loved ones can cause suffering and undesirable outcomes over time. So, the reality is that what I do affects other people, and it can lead to undesirable outcomes. However, on one hand is that what I just said. On the other hand is to view all sickness as a direct result of sinful immediate practice creates other problems. The man or the woman who has pancreatic cancer and is in guilt trying to figure out what they did wrong, why they contracted this disease. And certainly inappropriate to come in and start drilling down in what's in your life so we can get rid of it and then claim the healing in the atonement. And that's the terminology used. So on one hand of the spectrum, we have those who believe that there is no healing today, that it's not necessary. The Bible has replaced the fact of signs and wonders, and there's no need for healing today. And in my mind, that is a very poor hermeneutical approach. On the other hand, there is the view that everyone should be healed because healing is in the atonement of Christ. And if we don't claim the healing, we have to claim the healing in order to get the healing. I also think that is a poor position to be in, and it creates all kinds of unnecessary suffering. So where in the world do we land on this, in this whole thing? Just go back to the story. We see Jesus, first of all, acting in compassion towards the man in verses 6 through 9. He says, do you want to get well? Then take up your pallet and walk. It was that simple. He extended compassion and grace, and he healed the man. Later, Jesus comes back and he offers the man what I would call some good advice. It could very well be Jesus knew things about this man's practice that we don't know. But regardless, he gave the man some good advice for moving forward in his life. And this good advice is actually good advice for all of us. And the essence of the advice is, wow, once you've experienced the grace and the compassion and the good news of Jesus Christ, embrace it. Embrace life, opposing the idea of continuance in practicing of death practices. So could we look at this rather than a mandate, a warning, although there is warning, I have to admit, there is warning in this statement. But rather than looking at it from a negative context, looking at this given from a very informed authority, offering some very good advice to the man and indirectly to us today. So those are anybody want to comment on that? We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I've been talking here for, 15 minutes. So yeah, Bill, go ahead.
Well, the verse, and I was just going to hunt for it, is in one of the letters where it says, no one born of God continues to sin. And that was always explained to me that it doesn't mean you're not going to sin, but it means it's not going to be a habit for you. And I wonder if the verb or the continuing to sin is the same one Jesus is using here, meaning one more sin and you're back in trouble. No, just looking at it forward as a lifestyle. And maybe he said it to him because he interpreted as carrying the mat on the Sabbath means you can totally ignore the Sabbath now. And Jesus saying, no, you just don't understand the Sabbath. I'm not sure, but I think that stop sinning is sort of the sense of in the same sinning as no one born of God continues to sin. I think that's in John somewhere, one of the first Johns, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well,
Mike, I had a thought.
Okay, Jeff.
One of the things I thought about is this guy's sin to me was probably one of like holding a grudge basically against God because he hadn't been healed and he couldn't get in a pool and he was probably not in a good frame of mind. And after this, having been healed, his sins might be more of sins of opportunity that he hadn't had in the past. He's now mobile and he can go out and do things. And I think what, to me, Christ is warning him against is with this new, health and freedom that you have, don't turn that into an opportunity to sin. And to me, that's saying that when I'm blessed and when I have good things in my life, that I need to be careful not to fall into sin you know, having more opportunities. You know what I'm saying? For sin.
Well, I think
And
so. Yeah.
I need to continue to cling to Christ and to avoid those positions or those places where the opportunity for sin is greater.
Yeah. What I hear you say, what comes to mind, and really it relates back to what Bill was saying too, is that the man was instantly healed in his physical state. He went from prone to standing, but he's got 38 years of framework in his head that informed how he viewed all of reality. And maybe this is something Jesus is addressing. It says, you know, fella, you've been given all new life. Embrace that life and move forward from here. I'm of course putting what you're saying and how I frame it, but to harmonize our an opportunity for this man to harmonize his mental state, emotional state with his physical state, and just go on in life from here. That's I don't know, Jeff. What's your comment on that?
Well, no, I think I agree with that. And what I'm thinking about now is this COVID thing. And you know, I went out yesterday and the traffic was hideous because it seemed like everybody was saying, I don't care if we got a lockdown, I'm getting out of here today. And everybody was out and going around. And it was almost like this situation where this guy now has opportunity to get out and about and do things and maybe get himself in trouble, you know? So it just, to me, like you were saying, he's got a certain frame of mind, and that frame might be changing, and it might be, oh, look at all these opportunities. And I think Christ is warning him, yes, now that you're mobile, now that you have these opportunities, you need to be careful not to use them and fall back into sinful practice.
Could be. Yeah, jury is out. So I would like to move on, just because I want to get to what I think is, you know, the key here, and so we have some time to discuss. So we get past that section, and we can frame that however we wish. But in verse 16, notice it's John the Apostle, the writer, is saying, giving the first century audience explanation. For this reason, the Jews, which are the religious authority at that time, were persecuting Jesus because he was doing this and other things like this on the Sabbath. So this is a definitive statement of why John wrote this story and inserted it early within his gospel. And then he follows up. Actually, let's look at verse 16 in context. Let's go back here. The act of healing takes place. We're rewinding here for a minute. John 5:1-9 is the story that sets the scene. And the way that John the Apostle organizes his writing is that then he moves in verse 9b to what I'm calling a postscript. And it was the Sabbath, kind of like setting the scene. Then we see the pushback now in the text that we're examining today, 10 through 16, the pushback ending with verse 16 of this concluding statement. But then how I see it is that there's a second postscript in verse 17, another introductory ramp into what is going to follow. So we have postscript 9b, and I'm thinking a similar idea in John 17, where Jesus said, but he answered them. How he answered them, the mechanics of that, I have no idea, but John inserted it here for a reason. And he makes this statement this very important statement, which is going to inform the text, then the story as it continues, where Jesus is quoted by saying, "My Father is working until now, and I myself am working." And guys, not clear. It's not crystal clear. And why it was inserted here is not crystal clear, but I'm giving one explanation of what Jesus is saying. So I would like there's your opportunity to snap. Table time, it's 7:30, we're actually right on time. What do you think Jesus is talking about when he states, "My Father is working until now, and I myself am working"? I'd like you to think about that, and you'll be in groups of probably 3, like we normally do. And then a follow-up question, what does this mean for us today? So if you could take a picture of that screen, that's your question. I'm going to break you guys up now into breakout rooms, and we'll see you back here probably about 10 minutes to the hour. So see you after a bit.
As they say in
Here you
football,
go.
ready, break.
Is joining us. I
Hey,
think.
guys.
Yeah, Mike.
There you go.
Yeah.
We only had 2.
What I do is I check to see who's where, how many people are in each, and I just jump in on one that needs another body. So
We've been found wanting. There we go.
I'm not here to check in on you guys. So
There you go. Hey, I had some thoughts on this, Mike, and I'm going to get to it roundabout. But it seemed to me, and I wasn't here last week, so I didn't get to kind of talk about the reactions of the Jews on all of this. But it seemed to me, I watch a lot of the crime stuff like Blue Bloods and Chicago PD and stuff like that, and it seemed like it was one of these situations where they caught the drug dealer, but now they're trying to get to the supplier. So they're saying,
yeah.
You sinned by carrying your mat, but what we want to know is who did this for you, and we need to find this guy. So then they start accusing the supplier, Jesus, of working on the Sabbath. And his answer, and I'm not saying it's an alibi, but it's kind of, if you're taking the analogy that far, he's saying, listen, I am doing what God does. God has been working. My Father, God, has been working. And I'm continuing to do his work. So he's basically explaining to the authorities his authority for doing what he was doing.
Yeah, Jeff, I always appreciate your insights and your color on things. You've got a marvelous mind in the way that you cast things. To put Jesus in the, in the role, in the context of Chicago PD was really quite brilliant. So
It's just the way my mind works.
Mike, I think you really hit it when you acknowledged that this guy was lame a whole lot more. We don't know how old he was at the time, but
yeah,
the presumption is that he was lame a lot longer than he was whole. And he's still the same person. He's got 38 years of memory and perception of himself, and a couple of minutes of not being that way.
yeah.
And I was thinking of, the various philosophies like cognitive behavioral therapy, where they tell you to change the way you act, change the way you think. Now that we've recognized the problem, I'm afraid to be outside, I'm
Yeah.
agoraphobic or something. Well, there's more to it than recognizing it's a problem. What are we going to do about it now? Well, we're going to go outside and see if the world comes to an end or not. You need to start to act differently, think differently to accommodate this new reality that you have. And I think that's what Jesus was encouraging him to do. It's your whole life you thought of yourself as a crippled, lame person,
Yeah.
and you're not that anymore. Don't fall back to that way of perceiving yourself, because
Right.
that's not who you are. And I think Jesus is just his whole ministry is trying to get people to realize that they're not the sum total of their behaviors. They're what God says they are.
Hmm.
I've made you whole. I'm doing God's work. This is the truth. You've experienced it. You're walking. Don't go back to the old way. The old way is what got you lame. So I think,
Like Jeff, you have said that far better than I attempted to say it. I think that is a very mature look at this text. The reality is brain. Now I know, I'm just reading hearsay, but brain science has been verified time and time again that our brains are actually wired a certain way. And so this guy's got 38 years of wiring that is saying he is a victim and he is paralyzed. And now all of a sudden his physical condition changes. That wiring is still there.
Yeah.
And that has to be rewired. Maybe that, yeah. And I think you've hit it. Yeah.
And I think as far as forgiveness and sin, I thought of, the times where I have wronged people and I have misspoken or misstepped in some way, and I'm carrying around this perception of this person doesn't like me, or this person even hates me. And it affects your health, it affects your mental state, it affects everything in your life, even though I want to be like, I don't care what people think of me. You just do.
Yeah.
And if that person then comes by and says, Vince, I forgive you, everything changes. I mean, your whole demeanor changes, even the physicality of your body, the muscles tensing and everything. I could see how Jesus telling this guy, your sins are forgiven, would just change everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. And, a thought that I had, we're kind of a little off topic here, but, it's this whole subject of sin and healing is such a big one, has caused so much damage regarding whatever side you're on. And now I forgot what I was going to say. It slipped out. So sorry. But could we talk about this what I'm calling a postscript a little bit? I look at it as an enigmatic statement out of left field, but John put it in here for a reason. And it certainly states core of who Jesus is, how we understand Jesus. Not so much in the first century. They didn't really know who Jesus was. I mean, it was still all new. So what do you think this means? What is this statement? What is this saying? Jeff started out talking about a little bit, and either, what do you guys think here? Let's talk a little more.
Well, one of the things I thought about, and it was strange to me that he said, my Father has been working until now. That one kind of threw me a little bit.
Yeah.
Well,
Interesting.
what I'm maybe hearing him say to these guys is, my Father has been working and doing His will up until this point, and you guys have missed the boat. I did something that is contrary to your laws, not God's laws, your laws, and now you're condemning me for that. What I am doing is continuing God's work, which is the healing of mankind, the restoring of our relationship with each other. And the things that you are doing are getting in the way of that. I am doing God's will. Think about that. You guys are making it a big deal that it was done on a certain day and not looking at the fact that God or I have healed this guy, forgiven his sins, and he is ready to walk on in his relationship with me and in his relationship with the Father. And you guys are kind of getting in the way.
Yeah.
Well said.
You
Yeah.
know, and to me, it's just it seems to me he's pointing out the fallacy in their thinking. They are so wound around this being done on the Sabbath, and they took this command from God to rest on the Sabbath and not do work, and they have made a list of all these things that you can't do on the Sabbath that you have to consider work, that I'm not sure I would consider work. Picking up a pallet, to me, it's not work. I'm holding on to a possession that I need to take home or whatever. That's not work. But they have made it so specific in all this list of things you can't do. I think he's trying to say, man, you guys have missed the boat. Here's the big picture. God is trying to do this, and you guys have made all these rules and regulations that are just basically getting in the way.
Yeah. What do you
I-
think? Go ahead, Vince.
Well, I was thinking that Jesus said at other places, you've made the God of none effect by your traditions and things. The keeping of laws, for the children of Israel, I guess it's a good idea if you're walking around in the desert to not to have a backpack full of clams or something. The dietary laws that God gave them were with purpose. But if your whole if everything that you do is for the purpose of keeping the laws, like Paul talked about, then it's a control problem. I'm in charge of everything. I'm keeping all of the laws. I'm doing everything that's right. That's what's important to me. I'm, in effect, God. I'm the master of my destiny because I'm doing everything right and I'm in charge. But when you get into submission to God's will, you're not in charge anymore. Now it's relationship. Now it's wisdom and a matter of what does God want in my life? It could be different tomorrow than it was today. It might be different in a week than it was a month ago. And it takes a little more dynamic action than the strict adherence to laws that discipline of the mind can bring about. You don't even need God. Friends of mine joke that a brick could keep 8 of the 10 commandments. Just don't do this, don't do that.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't take a whole lot, and it doesn't take a relationship to keep law. And I think that's what these Pharisees have made the mistake, is they thought, if I do all of these laws, then I'll be right with God. And I think Jesus is showing them that you missed it. It's not you that are bringing about the goodness in life by adherence to law. It's God. It's relationship. Let me show you an example of this guy who was a sinner and now he's healed. He didn't keep any of the laws that you're telling him to do.
Yeah. I think what's behind, you know, I think what's behind this whole frame. I mean, I look at my little graphic and I see man healed, uh, the eyeball, and the way that's perceived is this man is healed is actually categorized as a violation of God's will. That's what the core of this is, and how anyone could come to that conclusion. Well, I don't, I'm really not quick to judge here because I've been guilty of that. And I'm sure all of us have been guilty of, but what is behind it, in my opinion, is a desire to please God. I don't think these Jewish religious leaders were out to make people's lives miserable. I don't think that was their intent. It certainly created, in fact, the data shows that the commoner viewed the Pharisee, or the Pharisees were the law keepers versus the Sadducees, were actually respected in the community because they were looked out upon as upright, straight, moral people. But the downturn is that they were, as you guys are saying, was totally missing it. And this story shows how far they were missing it. And so the question that I keep coming back to is, gee, what am I, because of my, quote, level of commitment to Christ, whatever you want to call it, my devotion to God is causing me to miss it in regard to what God is really doing? I mean, that's a probing question,
It is, and it goes to that question at the bottom of your slide there that said, how's this apply to us today? And I think what it's saying to me is all of your traditions or all of the good things that you're trying to do, what's your motivation there?
Yeah, there you go.
Motivation is to look good in the eyes of others, like the Pharisees, had the long phylacteries or whatever they call them, and the bells that called attention to themselves. If what I'm saying, what I'm doing, in what I hope is obedience to God, if my motivation is for me to look good and me to gain glory, then that is not right. I have to look and say, is what I'm doing in line with the work that God is trying to do in the lives of people around me?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I'm gonna jump out, guys. A good discussion, and we'll see you back in a few.
Okay.
Hey, Bob, did you not get assigned?
No, I did got assigned, but my meeting room froze up, at least on my screen, and I was kicked off. So I've been waiting for us to get back together.
Did it happen right away, or were you into it?
Oh, we were 5 minutes in.
Oh,
like,
okay. Yeah, well, that's one reason why I like to join into a discussion, so I left and joined a group.
yeah.
But, what happened to you today? Kind of.
I didn't know whether the whole thing froze up or just my bandwidth might have frozen us up.
I don't know, but you're coming through crystal clear, so I don't know, but I'm glad you.
Anyway,
glad
we were having
you,
a good discussion. You had good questions.
Yeah. I'm closing out the rooms now, so.
Okay.
So do you think I like to jump in on another group.
Go ahead if you want to.
Well, not right now, but it kind of leaves, if we have a problem, it leaves you hanging, but I don't know what the solution is. So who are you with?
I was with Art and Steve. Room 1.
Yeah, and they're still going.
They're looking for me.
And we're going to close in 15 seconds. So when I close the rooms, do you guys get hey, Dick, do you guys get a little thing on the screen that says this is going to close in 15 or in 1 minute?
Yeah.
1 minute. Yeah.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
I got to leave. I got something else I got to do, but I've got to leave the meeting right now. So see you guys next week.
Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Dick.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Yeah. See ya. Have a good week.
Hey, there's Bob Powell.
I disappeared.
Yeah, you didn't like us anymore, so you left our group.
I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, you guys were frozen in like Mount Rushmore. I just had to look at your. I couldn't even hear you talking.
Do you have a laptop or an iPad?
I have a laptop.
Okay.
First time, and I've been in a lot of Zoom meetings. First time that's ever happened.
Wow.
Well, let's just all agree that if it does happen, Bob, thank you for hanging with us. You know we're going to come back.
I knew you'd come back. Yeah.
I leave once all you guys are assigned into your room, I look at the list and I join a group that needs a person. So I like to jump in there and have discussion. And so if you get knocked off, you'll be back in the main meeting by yourself, but just have another cup of coffee until we get back. So let's talk. We've got 10 minutes about what did you guys talk about? The questions. What do you think Jesus is talking about when he makes this, what I would call an enigmatic statement, although, correlating to what's going on about this relationship with the Father and working, which has a direct correlation to Sabbath, working and Sabbath, expressing God's view of work, who is the author of the entire system. And, Jesus is making a statement about work. But then what does this all mean for us today? I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say.
Hey, Mike, why don't you speak for us? Because I thought you had a really good comment.
So I had a caution that I wanted to throw out in the earlier discussion that we had, and that is one needs to be careful about what they define as a sin, and then a reminder that exceptions in the scriptures are not actually exceptions, but they're there to show you when you might misunderstand the instruction. And so basically the Jews, what they were missing in that particular situation is that God's instruction for the Sabbath was that they keep it holy unto the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of missed that unto the Lord piece. And so they failed to notice that that guy was keeping it holy unto the Lord and they weren't. Because we know from other passages that the miracles and whatnot can be inhibited by disbelief. And this man believed, and so he was healed. And so in that sense, he was walking with God on the Sabbath, which is, keeping the Sabbath holy unto the Lord. Whereas for them, they were worried about it. And this gets into our modern situation. Really what they were thinking is you need to keep the Sabbath holy unto us. We have a definition of it and you have to follow our definition. And our definition is you can't do work. There's, in the Talmud and stuff, they have a whole slew of, they've made it very well defined. Let's put it that way, what you can and can't do and so on and so forth. But anyway, But yeah, that was the key thing, is to be careful about what you define as a sin, and then to notice that the Sabbath is to be kept holy unto the Lord. And you have a few exceptions, so-called, in the scripture, like when the disciples are picking corn and whatnot. Now they're walking with God. They're walking with the Lord in the cornfield. So they're actually adhering to keeping it holy unto the Lord while they're picking food and eating it. And so that's just one of those things.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I also brought in our discussion the element of Sabbath rest, which sometimes I myself don't follow, in the sense of not resting and just continually working and burning myself and becoming self-centered.
Yeah, we had the discussion about how God's giving the optimal solution, you know, in the sense of how he would like you to walk with him, and the verses about his, you know, burden being light and the yoke easy to bear comes into mind. His instruction is rest on the Sabbath, or in the New Testament, we're to set a day, not necessarily Saturday, but a day aside for the Lord. And
Okay, well, good. What about some of the rest of you in the question? You know, what is Jesus talking about here?
Well, you assigned me to a group of 2, which is me and Dick. And we talked about other things, that stuff. And Dick's gone, so I have a total free mic here without any restrictions. This is
Uh-oh.
great. Yeah. But we got the 2 things I thought. One is, first of all, the Jews, when they were doing the Talmud, we're trying really hard to understand what it meant not to work. I mean, they did a lot of, these things didn't come out of thin air. They said, you know, we don't want to disobey God's law. And you're right, Mike, they missed the idea of keeping it holy. But if you go back to Exodus, where the first of the 2 sets pop up, and it says, 6 days you labor and do your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath. Then it goes on there about not working with your maid and your maidservant, all the people that are supposed to obey the fact they're not going to work that day, whatever work looks like. And yes, the Jews may have misinterpreted and been a bit harsh on, or not harsh, but just totally missed the boat with carrying your mat. But Jesus' statement doesn't refer to that. Jesus' statement says, my Father is always working, and so am I. And I'm going like, what? I don't understand the point of that. It makes me, I mean, it says Jesus is in contact with his Father all the time. I mean, the Father are one. Okay, I get that. And it kind of says, and then Hebrews alludes to a Sabbath coming ahead. But he's making the statement here that God never took time off. That God didn't rest, and neither is he. And let me rephrase this. God's always working, and so is he. Now, whether that's rest or not, it's interesting. But until you get to Hebrews, it implies that becoming a resurrected people is entering into the God's rest overall. I'm really puzzled about that. Verse 17. I can't unravel it, or I can't get the point of it, because he's implying that they're not doing a Sabbath.
Well, Bill, I was thinking, and we were talking about it. Is that me or is that somebody else dinging? Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, somebody.
I don't know what that is.
Let me see if I can just unmute here. Oh, that was the problem. I wasn't muted anymore. What I'm thinking is, to me, he says, my Father has always been working until now. And then he says, and I am working, and he is not taking over, but what he is trying to define is, what is the work that God is doing? God is restoring relationship with man and himself. And the things that I'm doing as God's son are that same kind of work. It's the work I do.
I can get
restoring relationships. And what you guys have got down as a list of things that you cannot do on the Sabbath are just kind of getting in the way of the true work that God is trying to do, and that is to restore his relationship with his creation.
I can buy that, but he's still using the word work.
Yeah,
he's saying he's using this word in light of their understanding of Exodus 20. You know,
right.
And that just you're saying his work is a better work than the right work, and their work is the wrong kind of work. But it's still work.
Well,
I think the key there, though, is what is your definition of holy unto the Lord? So holy isn't without something. It's being set aside to.
But
something.
Exodus says holy means you don't work. I mean, that's right in the text. Now, you may misinterpret that, but the idea is work is not to be done on the Sabbath.
Right, I know, and the whole purpose of that, and this is what gets into God's solution being the optimal one, right? The purpose is, you know, the work that we do in life is something that can distract from the Lord, from our focus on the Lord, and so on and so forth. You know, so
no argument.
Yeah, so he's saying here's the perfect solution, and if you walk in that, you receive, and I'll use the word optimal, you receive optimal blessing when you walk in that. So, and in any given situation, the question is how do you do that? And it's left to an individual level. So we had a discussion because Dick's son works, he's a medical guy of some sort, and he works weekends basically, taking care of people. So the question is that a sin or not? And so I said, well, it depends. First of all, in the New Testament, it mentions that it doesn't have to be Saturday, that the instruction is just to set a day aside to the Lord. And then the other question is can you set a day of taking care of people aside to the Lord? And I personally probably couldn't do it. Like my work that I do, I don't think I can focus on God and do my work at the same time.
First of all, I agree with you, but I'm agreeing with you out of default. I still haven't answered that question in terms of what was Jesus trying to get across to them, because he was trying to tie the Sabbath to the law, to what he and his father were doing. And they're left scratching their heads like, what do you mean he's working all the time? Because when you read verse 4 of 20 Exodus, it says, this is tied to that he created the world in 6 days and he rested on the seventh day. This is all a continuity of that. And then Jesus comes back, he says, my father is working. And you might be right. Maybe he cut it off now and handed it over to his son. I'm not sure. I see if that's clear. But regardless, he's been working until now. So he's been working all this time.
Is it possible, Bill, that he is, and I'm out on a limb here, but that he is saying there's a definition of work here. There's a type of work that supersedes sort of physical labor, and the intent of the Sabbath in terms of you aren't laboring physically or in, for us mentally in the age of knowledge, that kind of thing, that there's a work going on that's greater than all of that kind of work. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's qualitatively different.
All those things, I'll be glad to stick my sticky note on and say yes. I'm still puzzled.
Well, and Christ, I think, explained this a little bit in other passages where somebody was healed, where he says, if any of you had an animal fall into a pit, would you not rescue the animal? Would you go down there? And basically, it's not so much the work as the outcome of whatever effort was put into saving an individual or saving an animal or whatever. So the outcome is more important in Christ's view than the fact that you say I shouldn't be working, so I'm just going to leave my animal there.
And I buy that too. All of that is good to me if you can exclude. If for some reason, what's the point of verse 17 then? I mean, he could have left that out and made that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a defense on Christ's part for the accusations that the Jewish leaders were leveling against him, in that he was disobeying the law, and he was basically saying that they're kind of misinterpreting the law in what God meant when he said don't work on the Sabbath. What he meant was set aside to do things or to draw near to God. And what was done, whether you want to classify it as a work, drew this man closer to God.
I wish he would have said, my father and I are doing something higher than work or something different than work, rather than nail that word on there, you know?
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in. It's 8:03, and again, hot topic. I understand that, but we're gonna close this off for this week, and then we'll pick up. What I hope to do here is to set the stage with what I'm calling, for lack of a better term, a postscript statement that John the Apostle is using to introduce the next section of what we'll be looking at, where things get worse in regard to the religious leaders' view of Jesus. And this statement that Jesus makes in verse 17 is the catalyst, the jumping, launching pad for that statement. We'll look at that next week. So have a good week, guys, and see you again.
Thank you, Mike.
Take care,
Thank you,
Mike.
Mike.
Thanks.
Mike, thanks.
Bless you.
Yeah, see you next week, guys.
Yep, bye.
Bye-bye.